Hi, I'm Dave Wurzel, and you're watching PHTV4, and this is From My Bookshelf. And with me today is my co-host, Matt Matkowski. Hold on a second. Let's see if we can. There you go. How you doing, Matt?
Great. How are you?
Good. Matt, you work in the Public Services Department at the Palisades Library?
That is correct. I've been with the library since October of 2018 in the Public Services Department, which is, basically the adult reference department. So, yeah, I like to help people find the books they want. So I'm excited to do this show.
And that's an option again, right? The library is partially open, not 100% service, but people can browse again. Is that correct?
That is correct. As of February 15th, we were letting people back in. And this time they are able to go into the stacks and browse the shelves and select their own books, which people seem very pleased to do.
Well, that's wonderful. Great that you guys can open again. I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to getting back in the library and browsing again, too.
Yes.
All right, so let's take a look here. So from my bookshelf is my bookshelf. Yours is that wonderful resource behind you, right?
That's right.
And what Matt and I are going to do is we're picking books from a variety of categories that we're going to recommend. We've each chosen 3 different categories, and we'll recommend a title from that. At the end, we're going to talk about books that might be on our shelf in the future. And in my case, I'm going to sneak one in that's already on my shelf that just came out. And Matt, I think you're going to go first. And let me check here. You are doing historical fiction detective novel.
That is correct. This book is The Devil and the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. It is his second book. You may have heard of him from his first book, which was The 7.5 Lives of Evelyn Hardcastle. That was fairly popular. It also had kind of a complicated structure. The main character in the book relived a day, kind of like Groundhog Day, in the body of a different character each day. And they had to piece together all the different information from those different points of view to solve a mystery. This one is much more straightforward. It's more linear, like a traditional novel, so that might be more accessible for people. It is set in the year 1634, and it begins with people boarding a Dutch East Indies Company ship that is about to set sail from a Dutch colony. The characters include the world's most famous detective, a Samuel Pepys, who was brought aboard the ship in shackles. So that kind of kicks off the mystery there, which is why is he locked up? He's accompanied by his sturdily built assistant, Aaron Hayes. There's colony's governor, the governor's wife and daughter, and various sailors, soldiers, and company men on the ship. As they are boarding the ship, a leper appears and sets himself on fire. And it kind of goes on from there with, that occurrence leading a lot of people to start getting very superstitious, suspect some supernatural things, and more and more people turn up dead on the ship as it sails at sea. And it is up to Aaron Hayes to try and figure out what's going on. So you've got that going on. You've got the background mystery of why is this Pips guy locked up? And, overall, it is, I think, a very well-written mystery that's set in a time period that doesn't get that much attention. And it's on a unique setting, a sailing ship at sea. So kind of like a locked room mystery there. The writing is good, the mystery is engaging, and the characters are interesting is what I came away with from this book. And yeah, it's definitely a recommendation from me.
It sounds really interesting, and I'm going to have to confess here, I just started the audio version of this book. I'm probably a little over a third into it. The reader is really good in the audio version, and it's a very interesting mystery, and
Yeah,
the characters, all the characters are very interesting characters. Yeah, I'm with you on this one. I definitely would recommend this.
very good.
Okay, the book I'm going to recommend comes from a nonfiction historical event, but an interesting other perspective. This is The Daughters of Malta by Catherine Grace Katz. And this book, it came out in September of 2020. Just as a side note, I read Eric Larson's The Splendid and the Vile in 2020. And this book almost reads like it could be a companion piece to it. Splendid in the Vial is about 1940 and a different, focuses specifically in England, but many of the same historical people. Now, if I can do this, it's way more interesting than I think my first sentence is going to sound here. This book, the focal point is the Yalta Conference, sometimes referred to as the Crimea Conference of February 4th to February 11th, 1945. So maybe that sounds kind of dry. It actually is a very, very interesting event. This is when President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Churchill, Premier Stalin meet in Yalta, in Crimea, and they are negotiating issues and conflicts at the end of the European War. The European War is wrapping up, and they're deciding how that's going to play out. And then also the Pacific War is still very much ongoing, and what that might involve. So the book covers a really interesting period in history with some very, very interesting people, Churchill, Stalin, Roosevelt, and several others. But we get an interesting perspective because the focal point of the story is actually presented through the stories or their presence of these three women. Sarah Churchill, Winston Churchill's daughter, is there. Anna Roosevelt, President Roosevelt's daughter, and then Kathleen Harriman, who is the daughter of Averell Harriman. Averell Harriman was the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union stationed in Moscow at the time. And because their stories are so interesting and they're so much a part of what happens because of the relationships with their father, you feel like you're getting an insider's view, kind of like pulling back the curtain on this incredibly important historic event. And the book is divided into three sections. At the beginning, they give you some background leading up to the Yalta Conference, and then most of the book is about the conference itself. And then the final section tells you what happens to these characters, these real life historical people after the conference. And it was just incredibly a fascinating account of this event and these historical people. I definitely recommend this book. It was very, very interesting.
Yeah, I remember, in high school and college reading about the Yalta Conference, in history class. But it seems like with this one, this book in particular, it seems like a very unique perspective that, definitely did not come through in my history textbooks.
Oh, that's an excellent point. That's exactly how I felt when I was reading it. In high school, in a history textbook, it was maybe a couple paragraphs or a page, and it was pretty dry. And when I read this, the whole thing came alive in a way I hadn't really expected. That's a really good point. Matt, you're going to recommend the next one, and we've got sci-fi Earthbound, but with an interesting other quality, a historical fiction element in it.
That is correct. That is correct. So this is part of a series. It's called the Lady Astronaut series. It's by Mary Robinette Kowal, who is, a pretty acclaimed science fiction writer. And yeah, like you said, this is a mixture of historical fiction and science fiction, but it's more kind of what I'd call sci-fi light. So it begins in the 1950s, the early 1950s, when I'm going to try not to spoil anything, but there's a huge global natural disaster that happens. And it's something that will, in the decades to come, render the earth uninhabitable for humans. So, the world kind of has to come together and figure out a way to either fix things or really jumpstart a space program and get us to a level where we're able to colonize other planets to save the human race. So tremendous resources are poured into NASA and other similar programs around the world. The main character here is an Elma York, who is a pilot and a mathematician. And so she gets drafted onto this project to do a bunch of the math stuff, along with a bunch of other female scientists and mathematicians. They're all very talented, and they soon begin to wonder, why is it that only the men get to actually go into space and put these ideas into action? So, this one, The Calculating Stars, it's the first book in the trilogy. In this particular book, their goal is to put a human on the moon, and then build from there into colonizing other worlds. Um, and I think it's a very interesting concept. It's fascinating to see, how they go about this Herculean task with 1950s level technology and the kinds of innovations they have to make. There are some great characters. Elma's husband is involved as well. He's a scientist and kind of high up in the chain in NASA. Um, a lot of her ideas she has to give to him to then present to the higher ups so that they're actually accepted. So I think it's a great mix of highlighting the struggles facing women in scientific fields, especially in the 1950s, as well as the main plot of trying to save humanities with 50s era technology. So yeah, that's good. The other book on the screen here, the Relentless Moon, I believe that just came out recently. So this is now completed, and you can go ahead and read it.
Sounds interesting, and I like you said, another interesting angle here. With females dealing with the 1950s, and yet very obviously intelligent, capable of being right there and should be there, but at that time period, not really quite able to.
Right.
Real way. Okay, good. Next book we're going to take a look at from me is the fantasy category, What If? Some of you may be familiar with this title already. The Midnight Library by Matt Haig has already been a New York Times bestseller. And it's fantasy in the premise, but the time period would be now. It's set in England. The main character is Nora, a woman in her early 30s. And I want to be very careful here that I don't spoil it, but give you enough of the premise to understand that um, Nora is somewhere between life and death. She has died, sort of, and in this experience, she ends up in the Midnight Library. And the Midnight Library is actually the library of infinite possibilities of her life. And I think that's even an expression I just pulled out of the book. Um, and what she gets to do is try out some things in her life if she had pursued that instead or made a different decision instead. And the Midnight Library has an infinite number of books in it because of the infinite number of possibilities, the way her life could have changed. And over the course of this book, you move through several of her life's what they might have been type experiences based on the different books she chooses. And for me, I don't know if this will help it, but I'm going to give a couple perspectives. I really like the book. It was really fascinating, interesting. I think for me, it reminded me a little bit of an old movie, old maybe for audience now, not for me. 1998, Gwyneth Paltrow came out in a movie called Sliding Doors, which told the story of a woman who's what happens with her life if she catches the train or misses the train. And you see those two storylines play out. This book is a little bit like that. Nora gets to see several different lives because when she chooses a book, she jumps in at the age she is, when she passed away. So she's in her early 30s, and that's her life, whatever it would have been if she'd gone down that other road. I'm not going to say it's a feel good. It is kind of a feel good book. There is some darkness to it. It reminded me a little bit of It's a Wonderful Life, the 1946 Jimmy Stewart movie, what the world looked like in his case without him. In this case, Nora gets to see the world in several different variations with her. Writing style reminded me a little bit of Mitch Albom. This book is definitely worth an explore. Nora's story is very interesting, compelling. You're going to want to read to find out, what's going to happen to her and where she's going to end up. And at the same time, I found myself thinking about that what if, what if I'd gone to school here, or what if I had done this instead, or what if I took that job, or and it's kind of an interesting exploration. I think this book would probably be a very interesting book club discussion type novel to work with. So
Yeah, this is definitely on my list of books to read. And yeah, it's fascinating way to think about things. Like, we all have these moments in our lives where you could have done something completely different, and be interesting.
and this book will definitely cause you to walk down that path. I agree with you. I think it's a really interesting premise. Let's see. Okay, Matt, you're going to take a look at another sci-fi, but this now we're going to other worlds and other galaxies.
That's right. That's right. You may be starting to see a theme in some of my books. But yeah, this is the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. It's a series of 4 loosely connected books. The fourth and final book actually just came out the week of February 16th. So you can read the whole set if you want.
So is that
But
The Galaxy and the Ground Within?
yes, correct. The Galaxy and the Ground Within. That's the latest book. The first one is on the left side of the screen here, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And yeah, so these are, the premise is basically these are sci-fi books in which humanity has only somewhat recently joined kind of a bustling galactic community full of many different alien species. The thing about these books is, they're sci-fi, but there are no huge spaceship battles. There's no saving the galaxy from ancient evils or other common sci-fi tropes like that. And I'm all for books like that, but these are kind of a refreshing, breath of air. So instead of being about stuff like that, these books are about people, whether they be humans or aliens. Um, and at the end of the day, it's really about the fact that everyone has their issues, and why not choose to kind of come together, talk those through, be kind, and help solve people's problems. So in a way, these books can be labeled, there's a new term floating around called hope punk, right? And it's books that are kind of leave you filled with hope instead of, grim, dark visions of the future. Um, so yeah, this is a good reminder to me that, hey, we're all in this together. We all have our own things going on, and why not just help each other out? Um, I mentioned the series is loosely connected. There's no overarching plot throughout the books. They share a couple of minor characters, and
So you
yeah,
could jump in at any one of them. You don't have to read from book one.
that's correct. You could jump in. For example, there is a minor character from book 1 who is a main character in book 4. So her relationship with one of the major characters from book 1, you would probably get more out of her character arc in book 4 knowing that, but the author does a good job kind of laying some of the background out for you, so it's not necessarily one of these series where you need to read the preceding book, but you
Right.
should.
I like, I agree with you. I think some sci-fis do a great job of holding up a mirror to our own culture, to our foibles or our conflicts, or, the issues we contend with. And sometimes it's interesting to see them played out in a more universal, scale or
Right.
setting, Um, all right, so good recommendations there. All right, so for me, the next book is, uh-oh. All right, no peeking. Here we go. The next book I chose was a good book that is also connected to another medium, in this case, a website, a videocast or podcast. This one is connected to a videocast or website, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man by Emmanuel Acho. This book came out in November 2020, and it's actually based on his videocast, which I would definitely recommend. That had come out several months prior to the book. A little background on Acho, if you're not familiar with him. He grew up in Dallas, Texas. He is the son of Nigerian immigrants. He ended up going to the University of Texas. He played football there. He was in the NFL, played for the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cleveland Browns for a couple seasons each, I believe. He eventually, in 2016, became a football analyst for ESPN, and then eventually moved on to Fox. He ended up creating this online video series, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, which is exactly what it says it is, and then decided to write the book based on what that show is. And so if you work with the title, that's the premise of the show and the book. If you could sit down with a Black person and ask a question or questions about some topics that might not be easy to discuss, but you'd like to ask them, and that's what he does. So the book is structured in a very interesting format. Emmanuel Acho has it's a question from an actual person. He gives just their first name, And then he explores the context of that question, what's around it, what's about it. He gives it some historical background. He talks about how it's at work in the world today. And then he talks about, some things going forward that we need to consider about that question. As an example, one of the questions in there is, why can Black people use the N word, but others can't? And he explores that, over several pages. What about what we call Black people? Like, are they African Americans or are they Black people? And he kind of traces, the history of that. He'll talk about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. It's very interesting. If you were to take a look at the video cast, the very first episode, it's just him. In the second one, his guest is Matthew McConaughey, the actor, who asks him a variety of questions. There's another one where he sits down with a white family. There's another one where he sits down with a group of white police officers. And it's very, very interesting. Brene Brown, the author and podcaster, she did an interview with him that you can listen to. It's really, really good. Probably the best way I can encapsulate this whole thing is, she says about Emmanuel Acho's book and his video cast, these are real questions, with real answers. So I would recommend the book and the video cast, but certainly, either one. The book is an excellent, interesting, very interesting read.
Yeah, it seems cliche to say like this is something we really need in, our current day and age, but hearing you talk about it, it seems definitely very valuable to get this perspective into our lives.
Absolutely. In his interview with Brene Brown, he even says that he realized, this is going back to the summer of 2020, I think, he realized that there's kind of a communication breakdown, that we need to get people talking together and listening to each other,
Yeah.
and I think that's what he's hoping to set out to do with his video cast in this book. I agree. It sounds a little cliche, but to me, this is a really dynamic effort at trying to bridge that gap.
Seems like it.
It really, really good one. So now we're going to take a look at books that might be on our shelf or on our shelf in the future. And like I said earlier, I'm going to sneak one in that is already on my shelf. But let's see here. Matt, you're going first. You've got a book, a bit of a horror suspense classic here, it looks like.
That's correct. This one is coming May 18th, 2021 from author Josh Mallerman. You may recognize that name because he wrote Bird Box, which really blew up. It was either 2018 or 2019 when it got adapted into a movie on Netflix with Sandra Bullock. So, I read Bird Box. I really enjoyed it. It was a very creepy and edge of your seat version of the end of the world. So this new book, it also falls into the horror genre, but there are some interesting spins to it. It's about a small town called Goblin, an interesting name for a town, I guess,
Yeah.
and the secrets that it has behind its doors. The pre-release buzz for this one has it described as playful horror. Not really sure what that means.
It's an interesting label.
Yeah. Perhaps the most interesting thing, though, without having read it, is the structure of this book. As you can see on the cover here, it's called A Novel in 6 Novellas. So I take that to mean, that we have a novel-length book, a complete story, but that complete story is told through 6 short novella-length novels that kind of connect together the different people and topics of this town of Goblin. So, I like it when authors try something new and mix things up. Maybe this will work, maybe it won't, but I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out.
I'm going to tell you, sold me on it. And I know we shouldn't judge a book by the cover, but this cover is pretty cool.
It is. It is.
All right. Well, thanks. Yeah, I agree. I think this might end up in mine, might also. Oops, excuse me. No cheating. Okay, here's mine. So this one, this one actually was in the Mite a few weeks ago, and it just found its way onto my shelf. It came out just a couple weeks ago, February, and I'm halfway through this book already. So let me tell you first, Think Again by Adam Grant. Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist. He's a professor at Wharton. He's done numerous TED Speaks. He's got a podcast that's, it's got like 25 million listens or views or whatever. That podcast is Work Life with Adam Grant. That probably could have been another book to connect into that earlier category. He's done incredible research about rethinking fundamental assumptions we make about motivating people, being creative, being generous, just a whole variety of categories. He is a very popular, working with management thinkers, but he's won several awards, including several scientific awards. Um, I read one of his earlier books, 2017, I think it came out, Originals. I thought Originals was an excellent book. And I would definitely recommend this book so far. And again, it probably fits well into this time period. And this book is for everybody. This isn't like it's for, a very, tight audience. No, this is an every person book written for everybody. It's very reader friendly. And I'll give you a couple samples here in a second, but in the prologue, he says, this book is about the value of rethinking and to explore how rethinking happens. And, so why is it so important? The book is divided into 3 sections. The first section is about opening our own minds. So you, the reader, the second section is takes a look at how we can encourage other people to think again, like in its title. The third section is about creating a community of lifelong learners. So kind of a quick sample, and this might have been the prologue. This is the type of logic he's working with. He says, when our clothes are out of style, we refresh them. We renovate our kitchen, periodically. Or, how about your operating system on your computer? If somebody in 2021 is working with Windows 95, we would probably roll our eyes and laugh at them, right? And yet, people will hang on to ideas or opinions they have from 1995. And so his premise is that the ability to rethink is a really critical part of being successful and also living a happy life. He provides a lot of interesting research, and it's not dull, it's not dry, it's very fast, very interesting. And he gives a lot of real life stories that all show the importance of thinking again. So as I said earlier, I've read his book, one of his books earlier. I'm going to start checking out his podcast now. So I'm already a fan of his. And the part of this book I've read, this will be one of my gift books this year. I'm going to, recommend this book to people, and I'm going to be handing this one out. It's incredibly fascinating, mind-opening about the importance of thinking again or rethinking.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like I myself, I have gotten locked into a way of thinking, and it's important to sometimes take a step back and look at, maybe there's new information, new evidence out there, but maybe the way I thought to do something all along is not actually the best way to go about whatever it is. So
That's an excellent point, because as I read I'm through that section of the book, and it was a little bit hard to read because I realized, I'm thinking about, well, yeah, when you get into arguments with other people and they need to think about this, and I'm like, well, what about me? And I found myself in that, like, wait a minute, I need to re-examine how I look at some of these issues. Yeah, I think you hit on a key part of this book. It's anyways, very good. I recommend it. Matt, how about you? What do you have next on your book list?
So, all right. As a librarian, I try my best to kind of, read outside my normal genres so I can do a better job recommending books and just talking to people about books. So this one falls into that category for me. Kristen Hanna is, of course, an extremely popular author, beloved by many. This actually is another very recent release. It came out February 2nd.
I think it's a New York Times bestseller already too.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. So the premise here is very interesting. The main character, a woman named Elsa, she lives and works with her family on a Dust Bowl era farm on the Great Plains in 1934. So as you can imagine, things are pretty dire for her and her family. And she has to decide whether it is best for her and her family to stick it out and try to make the farm work, or pack up and journey to California in search of better opportunities. So, of course, this being 1934, it's not as simple as just hopping in the car and, staying at a hotel overnight a couple times on your way to California. We have a family who's in extreme poverty, and there are a lot of obstacles along the way. So, there's that's weighing on Elsa. Her increasingly strained marriage also weighs on her. And it's a novel that it's set at a time that's not often touched upon in modern fiction. And it's the story of a woman who she has to be strong for herself and her family and just try to make the best decisions she can with the resources she has. So,
Sounds
yeah,
good.
it's popular and it's pretty good.
I know for you that for me, this book would be outside my wheelhouse, but I agree. I feel like, well, I need to find out why are these books so popular, or, what is so engaging about their stories. So yeah, I might end up having to take a look at this one also. The next book I'm going to recommend is also outside my did it again. Outside my wheelhouse, and that's The Paris Library. This one also just came out in February 2021. By Janet S. Charles here. The Paris Library, it revisits a time period that this author has worked with before. It's World War II, but it does move back and forth between Europe 1939 and Montana in the 1980s. But it weaves together the stories of three women, and it sounds very interesting. It's inspired, by a heroine of World War II as they face, but mainly the three women in this book, it's going to focus it on the challenges and the dangers they face within the context of Europe at war. So I'm going to give you the three characters real quick. You have a New York socialite, Caroline Faraday, who works in the French consulate. You have Kasia Kuzmarek, who is a Polish teenager who works for the underground. And then you have a German doctor, Herta Oberhauser. And, so we're going to bring these three women, their stories are going to, connect at some point. For me, the book falls into a category I'm interested in to begin with because it's historical fiction. I like reading about the World War II time period. In this case, I think this is going to end up on my shelf because we get a unique perspective. Three very different women from very different situations, but still facing the same struggle to, survive during World War II. So that's my take on the Paris Library.
You're right. It sounds good. I like historical fiction as well. I think it gives life to some of these events that otherwise, not that World War II is a dry subject, but, when you've read about it so much in history texts, it's good to kind of get these other perspectives and kind of bring it to life in a way that you don't get otherwise.
Yeah, and that's a great way. They bring it to life, right? Okay, and then I think we've got one more recommendation, Matt.
Yes. The Project Hail Mary. I'm really excited about this one. It comes out May 4th, 2021. It's the next book by Andy Weir, who is the author of The Martian, which, of course, not only a phenomenally successful book, but also turned into a very successful movie starring Matt Damon. I wasn't the biggest fan of his second book, which was called Artemis, but I happened to get a super advanced copy of this one, and I might like it better than The Martian, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, so I'll do my best to only speak broadly about the plot. But, like his other books, this is a sci-fi novel set in the near future. There's an emphasis on incorporating real science into the book. And the structure of it is pretty good. It opens with our main character in a situation where he knows about as much as what's going on as we do. So we kind of discover things together. And it kind of flashes back to his current situation and the past. So as the book goes on, we learn that scientists had discovered something going on in our solar system that would lead to a slow but assured end of humanity as we know it. Possibly not unlike the Lady Astronaut series, but in a different way. So again, a huge international effort has started to do something about this, and no expenses spared. Scientists, tech people, anyone who can contribute to the project is brought on board. And in the end, the solution is to send a Hail Mary mission out into space to try to discover something that can save the world. This book is very fast-paced. There are a lot of delightful twists and turns, things I never really saw coming. And, there's a lot of very smart people as characters in this book. And Weir, as usual, he finds a way to insert a lot of real science into this book in a way that actually makes it exciting and interesting and not dry and boring. So I can't recommend it enough. I think this one is also going to be very popular.
Oh, you sold me on it. I'm looking for it. I read The Martian. I saw the movie. I'm with you. This, and you've sold me. I'm in. I'll be getting this book in May.
Excellent.
All right. Let's see. Matt, thank you for being with us today. A lot of good books out there.
Yeah, there are good books out there. There are good books coming up. Thanks for having me. A lot of fun talking about books.
Great. I'm Dave Worzahl, and you've been watching From My Bookshelf. Thank you for watching, and good reading.